The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Meridian National Bank as Marcus Chen adjusted his worn leather jacket and approached the imposing mahogany counter. He had no idea that in the next 30 minutes, his entire world would shift on its axis, all because of one banker's arrogant assumption and a revelation that would leave everyone in that pristine lobby speechless. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Marcus had always been different. While his classmates at Jefferson High School in downtown Sacramento were obsessing over the latest sneakers or planning their weekend parties, Marcus was hunched over financial newspapers in the school library, studying market trends and corporate earnings reports. His teachers thought it was odd for a 17-year-old to be reading the Wall Street Journal during lunch break, but Marcus had a vision that burned brighter than any teenage distraction. Growing up in a modest two-bedroom apartment with his single mother, Elena, Marcus learned early that money wasn't just about having nice things, it was about security, opportunity, and the power to change your circumstances. Elena worked double shifts at the local diner, her calloused hands testament to years of carrying heavy trays and wiping down tables. She never complained, but Marcus saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she'd massage her aching feet after 14-hour days, and he made himself a promise: he would create a different life for both of them. The transformation began during his sophomore year when Marcus discovered cryptocurrency. While Bitcoin was still a mysterious concept to most people, Marcus saw potential where others saw confusion. He started small, using money from his part-time job at the neighborhood electronics store to make modest investments. $20 here, $50 there, amounts that seemed insignificant but represented hours of work stocking shelves and helping customers. Marcus's approach was methodical. He didn't chase get-rich-quick schemes or follow the latest trends blindly. Instead, he studied blockchain technology, analyzed market patterns, and developed a deep understanding of digital currencies that impressed even seasoned investors. His bedroom became a makeshift trading floor, with multiple monitors displaying charts, graphs, and real-time market data. The breakthrough came when Marcus was 19. He had been tracking a relatively unknown cryptocurrency called quantum coin for months, studying its underlying technology and the team behind it. While most investors were focused on the big names like Bitcoin and Ethereum, Marcus recognized something special in quantum coin's innovative approach to smart contracts and decentralized finance. When quantum coin was trading at just 12 cents per token, Marcus made the biggest financial decision of his young life. He liquidated his entire portfolio, took out a small loan against his future earnings, and invested everything, nearly $8,000, into quantum coin. His friends thought he had lost his mind. Even Elena, who had always supported his ambitions, expressed concern about putting all their eggs in one basket. For 6 months, nothing happened. Quantum coin fluctuated between 10 and 15 cents, and Marcus began to doubt his analysis. The pressure was immense. Every day he watched his investment remain stagnant, while other cryptocurrencies soared. He could have sold, taken a small loss, and moved on to safer investments. But something inside him, a combination of thorough research and gut instinct, told him to hold on. Then, seemingly overnight, everything changed. A major tech company announced a partnership with Quantum Coin, followed by adoption by several financial institutions. The price didn't just rise, it exploded. Within 3 weeks, Quantum Coin went from 12 cents to over $47 per token. Marcus's $8,000 investment had become worth nearly $3 million. But Marcus didn't stop there. He understood that cryptocurrency was volatile, and he needed to diversify his wealth to protect it. He began investing in real estate, starting with a small duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood. He renovated it himself, learning plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos, and spending weekends transforming the property into an attractive rental. The duplex generated steady income, which Marcus reinvested into more properties. He developed a keen eye for undervalued real estate, often purchasing homes that others overlooked because they needed work. While other investors were bidding on turnkey properties, Marcus was buying distressed assets at significant discounts and transforming them into profitable investments. His portfolio grew rapidly. Within 2 years, Marcus owned 17 rental properties across 3 cities, each one carefully selected and meticulously maintained. He established Chen Property Management, a company that handled not only his own properties but also managed real estate for other investors. The business grew organically, driven by Marcus's reputation for honest dealings and exceptional property maintenance. The success in real estate led to other opportunities. Marcus began investing in small businesses, providing capital to entrepreneurs who reminded him of his younger self, hungry, ambitious, but lacking the resources to turn their ideas into reality. He funded a food truck that became a chain of successful restaurants, invested in a tech startup that developed educational software, and provided seed money for a renewable energy company that was now publicly traded. Despite his growing wealth, Marcus maintained his modest lifestyle. He still lived in a simple apartment, drove a reliable but unremarkable car, and dressed in clothes that wouldn't look out of place on any college campus. He had learned that true wealth wasn't about displaying expensive possessions, it was about having options, security, and the ability to make a positive impact on the world around him. Elena had been able to retire from the diner, and Marcus had purchased a beautiful home for her in a quiet suburb. But he insisted on keeping his own living situation simple. He believed that maintaining his connection to his roots would help him stay grounded and make better decisions as his wealth continued to grow. The banking relationship that would change everything began innocuously enough. Marcus had been using a small community bank for his personal accounts, but as his business empire expanded, he needed more sophisticated financial services. Chen Property Management required multiple accounts, credit lines for property purchases, and merchant services for tenant payments. The community bank, while friendly, simply didn't have the resources to handle his growing needs. After researching several options, Marcus decided on Meridian National Bank. It was a regional institution with a strong reputation for commercial banking services, and they had a branch conveniently located near his office. The bank's marketing materials emphasized their commitment to supporting local businesses and their expertise in real estate financing. Marcus had scheduled an appointment to discuss establishing business accounts and exploring credit options for future property acquisitions. He arrived at the bank that Tuesday morning wearing his usual attire, dark jeans, a simple button-down shirt, and his worn leather jacket. To anyone watching, he looked like a typical young professional, perhaps a teacher or entry-level office worker. The Meridian National Bank building was impressive, with its soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, and the kind of understated elegance that suggested financial stability and tradition. Marcus approached the reception desk where a pleasant woman directed him to wait in the customer service area for his appointment. As he settled into one of the leather chairs, Marcus observed the other customers and staff. The bank clearly catered to an affluent clientele, well-dressed professionals conducting business transactions, elderly customers discussing investment portfolios, and business owners in expensive suits negotiating loan terms. Marcus didn't feel out of place, but he was aware that his casual appearance might create certain assumptions about his financial status. His appointment was with Jonathan Whitmore, a senior banking associate who specialized in commercial accounts. Marcus had spoken with Whitmore briefly on the phone and had been impressed by his knowledge of real estate financing and business banking services. Today's meeting was supposed to be a straightforward discussion about account setup and credit facilities. What Marcus didn't know was that his simple appearance and youthful demeanor would trigger a series of assumptions that would lead to one of the most memorable encounters of his life. He sat quietly, reviewing notes on his phone about the banking services he needed, completely unaware that his presence in that elegant lobby was about to create a situation that would reveal not only the character of the people around him, but also a secret that would shock everyone present. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge assumptions, reveal hidden truths, and demonstrate that success often comes in packages that defy conventional expectations. Marcus checked his watch 10 minutes until his appointment. He had no idea that those 10 minutes would feel like hours, and that when they were over, everyone in that bank would see him in a completely different light. The waiting area of Meridian National Bank buzzed with the quiet efficiency of serious financial business. Marcus noticed how conversations were conducted in hushed tones, how documents were handled with reverence, and how every interaction seemed to carry weight. He appreciated environments where money was treated seriously. It reminded him of the responsibility that came with financial success. A tall, impeccably dressed man in his early 40s approached the waiting area, scanning the faces of the customers. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, his silver tie knotted with precision, and his leather shoes reflected the overhead lighting. This was clearly someone who understood the importance of appearances in the banking world. "Mr. Chen?" the man inquired, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a seasoned financial professional. "I'm Jonathan Whitmore. Thank you for choosing Meridian National for your banking needs." Marcus stood and extended his hand, noting Whitmore's firm handshake and direct eye contact. "Thank you for making time to meet with me today. I'm looking forward to discussing how we can work together." As they walked toward Whitmore's office, Marcus caught the subtle once-over the banker gave his appearance. It wasn't unusual. People in financial services were trained to assess clients quickly, and Marcus's casual attire probably didn't immediately scream substantial net worth. He had experienced similar reactions before, and had learned not to take them personally. Whitmore's office reflected his personality perfectly. The walls were lined with framed certificates, professional achievements, and photographs of him shaking hands with what appeared to be important clients. His desk was organized with military precision, every document in its proper place, every pen aligned perfectly with the others. "Please, have a seat," Whitmore gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "I understand you're interested in establishing some business accounts with us." Marcus settled into the comfortable leather chair and pulled out a folder containing his preliminary notes. "That's correct. I have a property management company that's been growing rapidly, and I need banking services that can scale with the business. I'm also looking to establish credit facilities for future real estate acquisitions." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Whitmore nodded professionally, his fingers steepled as he listened. Property management can be a lucrative field, especially for someone willing to start small and build gradually. What kind of scale are we talking about? A few properties? Maybe a small apartment building? The question revealed Whitmore's assumptions, but Marcus answered matter-of-factly. "Currently, I manage 17 rental properties across Sacramento, Stockton, and Modesto. The portfolio generates approximately $42,000 in monthly rental income, and I'm looking to acquire 3 to 5 additional properties over the next 6 months. Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly, though he tried to maintain his professional composure. 17 properties, that's quite substantial for someone your age. May I ask how you accumulated the capital for such acquisitions?" Marcus had anticipated this question. It was reasonable for a banker to want to understand the source of a client's wealth, especially when that client appeared younger than typical property investors. "I made some successful investments in cryptocurrency several years ago and used those proceeds to build the real estate portfolio. I've been very focused on reinvesting profits rather than spending them on lifestyle inflation." "Cryptocurrency?" Whitmore repeated, and Marcus detected a note of skepticism in his voice. "That's certainly been a volatile market. Many young people have gotten caught up in the hype without understanding the risks involved." The comment stung slightly, but Marcus remained composed. "I spent considerable time studying blockchain technology and market dynamics before making any significant investments. The key was understanding the underlying value proposition rather than following trends." Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from professional interest to something approaching condescension. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate your enthusiasm, and I'm sure you've done well for yourself. But managing 17 properties requires significant capital, ongoing maintenance costs, insurance, taxes, and countless other expenses that many first-time investors underestimate. Are you certain you have the financial foundation to support this level of activity?" Marcus felt the familiar irritation that came with being underestimated, but he kept his voice level. I understand the complexities of real estate investment. That's why I'm here, to establish proper banking relationships that can support continued growth. Of course, Whitmore said, though his tone suggested he was humoring a naive young man. Let's start with something more appropriate for someone in your position. We have excellent starter business accounts that would be perfect for a small-scale operation. Perhaps we could begin with basic checking and savings accounts, and as your business grows over the years, we can revisit more sophisticated services. The condescension was becoming impossible to ignore. Marcus realized that Whitmore had made up his mind about his financial capacity based purely on his appearance and age. Mr. Whitmore, I think there might be some confusion about the scope of what I'm looking for. I need merchant services for processing tenant payments, multiple business accounts for different entities, and credit facilities in the range of $2 to $3 million for property acquisitions. Whitmore's expression hardened, and he leaned forward with what appeared to be growing impatience. Mr. Chen, I've been in banking for over 15 years, and I've seen countless young entrepreneurs come through those doors with unrealistic expectations about their financial capabilities. The cryptocurrency boom created a lot of paper millionaires who thought they understood business, but real estate investment isn't a game. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. I'm not playing games, Mr. Whitmore. I'm a serious investor looking for serious banking services. Are you? Whitmore's voice carried a sharpness that cut through the professional veneer, because from where I'm sitting, I see a young man in jeans and a worn jacket talking about multi-million-dollar credit lines. Do you have any idea what kind of documentation, collateral, and financial history we require for facilities of that magnitude? The office fell silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Marcus could feel his temper rising, but years of dealing with skeptics had taught him the value of staying calm. What documentation would you need to see? Whitmore sighed heavily, as if dealing with a particularly slow student. Mr. Chen, let me be frank with you. You're asking about credit facilities that most of our clients spend decades building toward. The kind of wealth you're describing doesn't come from getting lucky with some internet money and buying a few rental houses. Real financial success requires education, experience, and the kind of business acumen that frankly you don't demonstrate by walking into a bank dressed like you're going to a barbecue. Marcus set his folder down carefully on the desk, his movements deliberate and controlled. So you're telling me that my clothing determines my creditworthiness? I'm telling you that successful business people understand the importance of presentation, preparation, and realistic expectations. Whitmore replied, his voice rising slightly. Banks don't hand out millions of dollars to kids who made some money gambling on cryptocurrency. This is serious business. And frankly, you're wasting both of our time with these fantasies about being some kind of real estate mogul. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could feel the weight of every assumption Whitmore had made, every stereotype he had applied, every conclusion he had drawn based on nothing more than appearance and age. It was a moment that crystallized everything wrong with judging people by surface-level characteristics. I see, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous calm. So in your professional opinion, I'm financially irresponsible, naive, unqualified to discuss serious banking services. Whitmore seemed to interpret Marcus's calm tone as acquiescence rather than the gathering storm it actually represented. Look, there's no shame in starting small. Everyone has to begin somewhere. But coming in here talking about multi-million-dollar credit lines, when you clearly don't have the background or resources to support such arrangements, well, it's financially stupid to be blunt about it. The phrase financially stupid seemed to echo in the office, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. He had been called many things over the years: young, inexperienced, lucky, but never financially stupid. Not by someone who clearly had no idea what he was talking about. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Mr. Whitmore, would you mind if I made a quick call? I think there might be someone who could help clarify this situation. Whitmore waved dismissively. If you need to call your parents or someone to help explain banking basics, go ahead. Though I should mention that co-signers for large credit facilities need to meet even more stringent requirements. Marcus scrolled through his contacts and found the number he was looking for. Hello, Patricia. This is Marcus Chen. I'm actually sitting in one of your branches right now, and I'm having an interesting conversation with one of your associates. Yes. Meridian National on Riverside Drive. That's right, Mr. Whitmore. I think it might be helpful if you could join us for a few minutes. Whitmore's expression shifted from condescension to confusion as he realized Marcus was speaking to someone with apparent authority. Who exactly are you calling? Marcus ended the call and placed his phone on the desk. Someone who might have a different perspective on my financial capabilities. Mr. Chen, I don't appreciate games or attempts to intimidate bank staff, Whitmore said, though there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. If you're trying to impress me by name-dropping or claiming connections you don't have— I'm not claiming anything, Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. I'm simply trying to resolve what appears to be a fundamental mental misunderstanding about my relationship with this institution. Whitmore stood up from his desk, his professional facade cracking slightly. What kind of relationship? You called yesterday to make an appointment for new business accounts. There's no existing relationship to misunderstand. Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the office, but it wasn't a warm expression. Actually, Mr. Whitmore, I think you'll find that my relationship with Meridian National is quite a bit more complex than you realize. The banker stared at him, confusion and growing concern evident on his face. Outside the office, Marcus could hear the sound of heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor, growing closer with each step. The moment of revelation was approaching, and Marcus found himself curious to see how dramatically Whitmore's attitude would change when the truth finally came to light. The clicking of heels on marble grew louder, accompanied by what sounded like hurried footsteps and hushed voices in the hallway outside Whitmore's office. Marcus remained seated, his expression calm despite the storm brewing inside him. He had learned long ago that the most powerful reactions often came from restraint rather than explosion. Whitmore, meanwhile, had begun to pace behind his desk, his earlier confidence replaced by visible agitation. Mr. Chen, I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull here, but I want you to know that Meridian National takes any attempts at fraud or deception very seriously. If you're impersonating someone or making false claims about your identity— My identity, Marcus interrupted, genuinely puzzled. Mr. Whitmore, I've been completely honest about who I am. I'm Marcus Chen, owner of Chen Property Management. Everything I've told you is verifiable. Before Whitmore could respond, there was a sharp knock on the office door. Without waiting for permission, the door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal business suit. Her silver hair was pulled back in a professional chignon, and her bearing suggested someone accustomed to authority. Behind her stood two other bank employees, their faces showing a mixture of concern and curiosity. Jonathan, the woman said, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of senior management, we need to talk. Now. Whitmore's face went pale. Ms. Richardson, I'm currently in a meeting with a potential client. Perhaps we could discuss whatever this is about later. No, Jonathan, we cannot discuss this later. Patricia Richardson, the regional vice president of Meridian National Bank, stepped fully into the office, her eyes immediately finding Marcus. Mr. Chen, I apologize for the interruption, but I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Marcus stood respectfully, extending his hand. Miss Richardson, thank you for coming down. I wouldn't have called if it wasn't necessary. Whitmore looked between them, his confusion deepening. Wait, you two know each other. How is that possible? Mr. Chen called yesterday for a new client appointment. Richardson's expression hardened as she turned to face her subordinate. Jonathan, please sit down. Mr. Chen, would you mind if I asked exactly what transpired during your meeting? Marcus glanced at Whitmore, who had reluctantly taken his seat, before responding. I came here to discuss establishing banking services for my business operations. I explained that I manage a portfolio of rental properties and need credit facilities for future acquisitions. Miss Whitmore seemed to believe that my requests were unrealistic and suggested that my expectations were, in his words, financially stupid. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richardson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained professionally controlled. He said what? To be fair, Marcus continued, Mr. Whitmore was operating under certain assumptions about my financial capacity based on my appearance and age. I understand that banks need to be cautious about unrealistic requests. Whitmore seized on this apparent olive branch. Exactly, Miss Richardson. This young man came in here asking about multi-million-dollar credit facilities while dressed like he's going to a garage sale. I was simply being prudent about the bank's resources and explaining that such requests require extensive documentation and proven financial history. Richardson closed her eyes briefly, as if summoning patience from some deep well. When she opened them, her gaze fixed on Whitmore with laser intensity. Jonathan, are you familiar with the name Chen Holdings? Whitmore blinked. Chen Holdings? The real estate investment company. Of course, they're one of our largest commercial clients. They maintain substantial deposits across multiple accounts, and we've provided credit facilities for several major property acquisitions. And are you familiar with the principal owner of Chen Holdings? Well, no, not personally. The account is managed through our commercial division, and I believe most interactions go through corporate representatives or attorneys. But the owner would have to be someone with extensive real estate experience and substantial net worth to qualify for the credit lines we've extended. Richardson turned to Marcus, her expression mixing apology with barely contained anger at her employee. Mr. Chen, would you mind clarifying for Mr. Whitmore exactly what your relationship is to Chen Holdings? Marcus had been dreading and anticipating this moment in equal measure. He had worked hard to keep his personal banking separate from his business empire, partly for privacy and partly to avoid exactly the kind of preferential treatment that might now be expected. Chen Holdings is my primary investment vehicle. I established it 3 years ago to manage my real estate acquisitions and other business interests. The silence that followed was deafening. Whitmore's face cycled through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally horror. His mouth opened and closed several times before any words emerged. That's impossible, he finally managed. Chen Holdings has assets worth, the credit facilities alone are worth over $8 million. The property portfolio is valued at approximately $24 million as of the last assessment. Marcus finished quietly. Not including the liquid assets held in various accounts or the equity positions in several private companies. Richardson stepped forward, her professional demeanor now tinged with genuine respect. Mr. Chen is not only the owner of Chen Holdings, Jonathan, but he's also been instrumental in several community development projects that the bank has been proud to support. The Affordable Housing Initiative in East Sacramento, the Small Business Incubator Program, those were his projects. Whitmore looked like he might be physically ill. The color had drained from his face completely, and his hands were visibly shaking.
Mr. Chen, I had no idea. The accounts are handled by our commercial division, and there was no indication that you would be.
That would I be? Marcus asked, his voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Young? Casually dressed? Not what you expected a successful businessman to look like. I sincerely apologize. Whitmore stammered. If I had known who you were. But you didn't know who I was, Marcus interrupted. And instead of treating me with basic professional courtesy until you could determine my qualifications, you made assumptions. You dismissed my requests, questioned my intelligence, and ultimately called me financially stupid based on nothing more than my appearance. Richardson's expression had grown increasingly stern as the details emerged. Jonathan, is this accurate? Did you actually use those words with one of our most valued clients? Whitmore's shoulders sagged. Ms. Richardson, I was simply trying to manage the bank's risk exposure. When someone walks in asking for millions in credit without apparent qualification, Richardson's voice rose slightly. Did you bother to run a credit check? Did you ask for financial statements? Did you make any effort whatsoever to verify Mr. Chen's claims before insulting him? The question hung in the air because everyone in the room knew the answer. Whitmore had made his judgment based on superficial characteristics and had never bothered to look deeper. It was exactly the kind of discriminatory behavior that banks worked hard to avoid, both for legal reasons and because it was simply bad business. Marcus watched the exchange with mixed feelings. Part of him was satisfied to see Whitmore's arrogance crumble, but another part felt uncomfortable with the man's obvious distress. He had never wanted to be the kind of person who used wealth to intimidate others, even when they deserved it. "Miss Richardson," Marcus said, "while I appreciate your concern, I'd like to focus on moving forward constructively. The reason I called you was to resolve the misunderstanding, not to create problems for your staff." Richardson nodded, though her expression remained severe. "That's very gracious of you, Mr. Chen, but this situation represents a serious failure in our customer service standards. Jonathan, I think it would be best if you stepped out while Mr. Chen and I discussed how to proceed." Whitmore stood on unsteady legs, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "Mr. Chen, I want you to know that my comments were completely inappropriate and unprofessional. I hope you'll accept my sincere apology." Marcus studied the banker's face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with fear for his job. "Mr. Whitmore, I accept your apology. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is what we learn from them." As Whitmore left the office, Richardson closed the door and turned back to Marcus. "I cannot adequately express how embarrassed I am by what happened here today. Jonathan's behavior was completely unacceptable, and I want to assure you that we will be reviewing our customer service protocols to ensure this never happens again." Marcus returned to his seat feeling emotionally drained by the confrontation. "Ms. Richardson, I understand that people make assumptions. I've dealt with this kind of thing before. What bothers me isn't just the personal slight. It's what this says about how your bank treats customers who don't fit a certain profile." "You're absolutely right," Richardson acknowledged. "And I want you to know that we take these issues very seriously. Beyond the immediate personnel matters, we'll be implementing additional training to ensure our staff understands the importance of treating every customer with respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived background." "I hope so," Marcus replied, "because if someone like me who already has a relationship with the bank can be treated this way, I can only imagine how others might be received." Richardson nodded gravely. "Point taken. Now, regarding your banking needs, I'd like to personally ensure that we provide you with the level of service you deserve. What specifically were you looking to accomplish today?" Marcus pulled out his folder, though the mood in the room had shifted dramatically from his original expectations. "I need to establish some additional business accounts for a new venture I'm launching. It's a financial technology company focused on making investment tools more accessible to young people from working-class backgrounds." "That sounds fascinating," Richardson said, and Marcus could tell her interest was genuine. "Given what happened today, I imagine there's some personal motivation behind that mission." Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the bank. "You could say that. I believe that everyone deserves access to financial education and investment opportunities, regardless of their background or how they might appear to traditional institutions." As they began discussing the details of his banking needs, Marcus reflected on the morning's events. The confrontation with Whitmore had been unpleasant, but it had also reinforced his commitment to changing how financial services approached people from non-traditional backgrounds. Sometimes the most valuable lessons came from the most difficult experiences. The revelation of his true identity had transformed the dynamic in the room, but Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. Changing attitudes and assumptions would take more than one dramatic moment. It would require sustained effort and a commitment to treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived prowess. The conversation with Patricia Richardson flowed smoothly as they outlined the banking services needed for Marcus's new fintech venture. As they worked through the details, Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by Richardson's professionalism and her apparent commitment to addressing the systemic issues that had led to the morning's confrontation. "The technology platform we're developing," Marcus explained, We'll democratize access to investment education and tools that have traditionally been available only to wealthy clients. We want to eliminate the minimum account balances, remove the intimidating jargon, and create pathways for young people to build wealth regardless of their starting point. Richardson nodded thoughtfully as she took notes. That's exactly the kind of innovation the financial sector needs. Too often, we create barriers that prevent people from accessing services that could genuinely improve their lives. Your platform could bridge that gap. As they finalized the account structures and credit facilities, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and saw it was from David Kim, his business attorney who had been waiting to hear about the banking meeting. How did it go with Meridian? Are we moving forward with them for the fintech accounts? Marcus showed the message to Richardson. My attorney is waiting to hear how our meeting went. I imagine he'll be interested in the full story. Richardson winced slightly. I hope the positive resolution outweighs the initial difficulties. We truly value your business, Marcus, and I want to ensure that your experience with us moving forward exceeds your expectations. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Richardson's assistant, Maria Santos, peered in with an apologetic expression. Ms. Richardson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been some unusual activity in the lobby, and I thought you should know. What kind of activity? Richardson asked, her brow furrowing. Well, it seems that word has spread about Mr. Chen being here today, and several staff members are curious about meeting him. Also, there are a few other clients who heard about the situation with Mr. Whitmore, and they've expressed concerns about their own experiences with our customer service. Marcus and Richardson exchanged glances. What exactly did they hear? Marcus asked. Maria shifted uncomfortably. The story that's circulating is that a major client was treated dismissively by one of our associates, and when his true identity was revealed, it caused quite a scene. People are talking about it as an example of the bank making assumptions about customers based on appearance. Richardson closed her eyes briefly. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Maria, please ask everyone to maintain normal operations and avoid discussing client matters. We need to handle this situation carefully. As Maria left, Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. Ms. Richardson, I never intended for this to become public knowledge within the bank. I simply wanted to resolve the misunderstanding and establish my business accounts. I understand completely, Richardson replied, but in an environment like this, news travels fast. The positive aspect is that this could serve as a teaching moment for our entire staff about the importance of treating every customer with respect. Through the glass walls of Richardson's office, Marcus could see increased activity in the main banking area. Several employees were engaged in animated conversations, and he noticed more than a few glances in their direction. The situation was clearly evolving beyond a simple customer service issue. Perhaps, Marcus suggested, this could be an opportunity to address these issues more broadly. If other customers have had similar experiences, maybe there's a pattern that needs to be examined. Richardson pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. You're right. This incident might be symptomatic of larger cultural issues within our organization. I'm going to recommend that we conduct a comprehensive review of our customer service practices and implement bias training for all customer-facing staff. Their discussion was interrupted again, this time by Richardson's direct phone line ringing. She answered with a crisp Richardson speaking, then listened intently for several minutes, her expression growing increasingly serious. I see, she said finally. Yes, I'll handle it personally. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. She hung up and turned to Marcus with a concerned expression. That was our regional director. Apparently, the story has reached the executive level, and there are concerns about potential regulatory implications. When a bank treats customers differently based on appearance or perceived background, it can trigger fair lending practice reviews. Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. Ms. Richardson, I want to be clear that I never intended to create problems for the bank or for Mr. Whitmore personally. I was simply trying to conduct business. Of course, and you handled the situation with remarkable grace, Richardson assured him. But the reality is that this incident highlights practices that needed to be addressed anyway. Sometimes it takes a dramatic situation to force necessary changes. As if summoned by their conversation, there was another knock on the door. This time it was a man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit that radiated executive authority. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to making important decisions. "Patricia," he said as he entered, "I came as soon as I heard." "Mr. Chen, I presume? I'm Robert Hawthorne, Regional Director for Meridian National." Marcus stood and shook Hawthorne's hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. This was clearly someone who understood the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Hawthorne, I appreciate you taking the time to address this personally." Hawthorne took a seat, his expression serious but not hostile. "Mr. Chen, I want to begin by offering my personal apology for what you experienced today. The behavior you encountered does not represent the values or standards of Meridian National Bank." "I appreciate that," Marcus replied. "Ms. Richardson has been very professional in addressing the situation." "Good. But I'm afraid the implications extend beyond customer service," Hawthorne continued. "When we treat customers differently based on assumptions about their background or financial status, we potentially violate fair lending regulation. This isn't just about being polite, it's about legal compliance and ethical business practices." Richardson leaned forward. "I've already begun planning comprehensive staff training to address these issues." Hawthorne nodded approvingly. "That's a good start, but I think we need to go further. Mr. Chen, would you be willing to share your experience as part of a case study for our staff training program? Obviously, we would compensate you for your time and ensure your privacy is protected." Marcus considered the request carefully. If it would help prevent other customers from experiencing similar treatment, I'd be willing to participate. But I'd want to ensure that the focus remains on systemic improvement rather than punishing individuals. "Agreed," Hawthorne said. "In fact, your approach to this situation, focusing on solutions rather than retribution, is exactly the kind of leadership thinking we need more of in our industry." Their conversation was interrupted by commotion outside the office. Through the glass, they could see a small crowd gathered near the customer service area, and voices were becoming audible despite the office's soundproofing. Maria Santos appeared at the door again, looking more flustered than before. "Miss Richardson, I'm sorry, but the situation in the lobby is escalating. Several customers are demanding to speak with management about their own experiences with discriminatory treatment. There's also a reporter from the Sacramento Business Journal who somehow heard about the incident." The three executives exchanged concerned glances. What had begun as a simple banking meeting had evolved into a potential public relations crisis. "How did a reporter find out?" Richardson asked. "Apparently, one of the customers who overheard the story called them. The reporter is asking about the bank's policies regarding fair treatment of customers and whether there have been other incidents of discrimination." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Mr. Hawthorne, Ms. Richardson, I never wanted this to become a public spectacle. Maybe I should speak with the reporter and try to minimize the story." Hawthorne shook his head firmly. "Mr. Chin, you have nothing to apologize for. You were treated inappropriately, and the fact that it's generating attention might actually be beneficial in the long run. Sometimes institutions need external pressure to implement necessary changes." Richardson stood and moved to the window, observing the activity in the lobby. "The customers who are speaking up, this suggests that today's incident wasn't isolated. We may have a more widespread problem than we realized. Which means," Hawthorne added, "that addressing it comprehensively becomes even more important. Mr. Chen, I know this has been a difficult day for you, but your experience may be the catalyst for meaningful reform in how we serve our community." Marcus looked out at the growing crowd in the lobby, seeing faces that reflected frustration, anger, and hope for change. He realized that his confrontation with Whitmore had tapped into something much larger, a pattern of exclusion and assumption that affected far more people than just himself. "In that case," Marcus said, "I think we need to approach this systematically." What if we organized a community forum where customers could share their experiences and help us understand how to improve? Not just complaining, but collaborative problem solving. Hawthorne's eyes lit up with interest. That's an excellent idea. A public commitment to change with community input on how to implement it effectively. As they began planning this broader response, Marcus reflected on how dramatically the day had unfolded. What started as a simple banking appointment had become a catalyst for institutional change. The personal slight he had experienced was transforming into an opportunity to address systemic issues that affected entire communities. The reporter in the lobby represented both a challenge and an opportunity. The story would inevitably focus on the dramatic revelation of his wealth, but Marcus hoped it might also highlight the deeper issues of access, respect, and equality in financial services. Looking ahead, he could see that this day would mark a turning point, not just in his relationship with Meridian National Bank, but in his understanding of how his success could be used to create positive change for others who faced similar challenges. As word of the incident spread beyond the bank's walls, Marcus found himself at the center of a conversation he never expected to lead. The Sacramento Business Journal reporter, Jennifer Walsh, had positioned herself strategically in the lobby, conducting impromptu interviews with customers who were eager to share their own experiences with discriminatory treatment at various financial institutions. Marcus watched through Richardson's office window as the crowd in the lobby continued to grow. What had started as a routine banking business was transforming into something that resembled a community awakening. People who had silently endured dismissive treatment were finding their voices, encouraged by the knowledge that even someone with significant wealth had faced similar challenges. "Mr. Chen," Hawthorne said, interrupting his observations, "I think it's time we addressed this situation directly. Would you be comfortable speaking with Ms. Walsh? I believe your perspective could help frame this story in a constructive way." Marcus considered the request carefully. Media attention made him uncomfortable, but he recognized the opportunity to shift the narrative from personal grievance to community empowerment. "I'll speak with her, but I want to emphasize the positive potential for change rather than dwelling on the negative aspects of what happened." Richardson gathered her notes and stood. "I'll accompany you. As the senior manager responsible for this branch, I need to take ownership of what occurred and outline our commitment to improvement." The three of them made their way through the bank to where Jennifer Walsh was conducting interviews. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of professional competence that suggested she understood the significance of the story developing around her. "Ms. Walsh," Hawthorne approached first. "I'm Robert Hawthorne, Regional Director for Meridian National. I understand you're interested in speaking with us about today's events." Walsh looked up from her notebook, where she had been recording quotes from other customers. "Mr. Hawthorne, thank you for making yourself available. I'm particularly interested in speaking with Ms. Chen about his experience, but I'd also like to understand how the bank plans to address what appears to be a pattern of discriminatory treatment." Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus Chen. I'm willing to share my experience, but I hope we can focus on solutions rather than just problems." Walsh's expression brightened with professional interest. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate your willingness to speak. Can you tell me what happened here today?" As Marcus recounted the morning's events, he was careful to avoid inflammatory language while still conveying the impact of Whitmore's assumptions and comments. He emphasized his interest in working with the bank to create positive change rather than simply criticizing past behavior. "The real issue," Marcus explained, "isn't just about how I was treated, but about how many other people might be experiencing similar barriers to financial services. If someone like me, who has an existing relationship with the bank, can be dismissed so easily, imagine how difficult it must be for people who are genuinely struggling to access basic banking services." Walsh took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Mr. Chen, I understand you're quite successful in business despite your young age. Do you think age discrimination played a role in how you were treated?" "Possibly," Marcus replied thoughtfully, "but I think it goes deeper than age. It's about assumptions based on appearance, background, and preconceived notions about who looks like a successful business person. Those assumptions can affect people of any age who don't fit traditional stereotypes. Richardson stepped into the conversation. Sim Walsh, I want to be clear that Mr. Chen's experience represents a failure in our customer service standards. We're committed to comprehensive training and policy changes to ensure this never happens again. What specific changes are you planning? Walsh asked, her pen poised over her notebook. Hawthorne outlined their preliminary plans for bias training, policy review, and the community forum that Marcus had proposed. As he spoke, Marcus noticed that several of the customers who had been waiting to share their own stories were listening intently. One of them, an elderly Latina woman named Rosa Mendoza, approached the group. "Excuse me?" she said hesitantly, "but I heard what you were saying about changes, and I wanted to tell you about what happened to me last month." Walsh immediately turned her attention to Mrs. Mendoza, recognizing another important voice in the developing story. "Please, tell us what happened." Mrs. Mendoza described how she had been made to wait over an hour to open a simple savings account, while younger, well-dressed customers were served immediately. When she finally met with a banker, they spoke to her slowly and loudly, as if she couldn't understand English, despite the fact that she was a retired teacher who had taught in Sacramento schools for 35 years. "I left without opening the account," she concluded. "I felt so embarrassed and frustrated that I just couldn't continue with the process." Marcus felt a surge of anger on her behalf, but also recognition of an opportunity. "Mrs. Mendoza, would you be interested in working with us to help design better customer service protocols? Your experience as an educator would be invaluable in creating training programs." Her face lit up with surprise and interest. "You would want my help?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied. "Change needs to come from the community, not just from corporate boardrooms." Walsh was taking notes furiously, clearly recognizing that the story was evolving beyond a simple customer service complaint into something much more significant. "Mr. Chen, it sounds like you're proposing a collaborative approach to addressing these issues." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "Instead of just complaining about problems, we should be working together to create solutions. Banks need to serve their entire community, and the community needs to be involved in defining what good service looks like." As their conversation continued, more customers joined the group, each adding their own perspective to the growing discussion. There was James Thompson, a young African-American entrepreneur who had been told his business plan was unrealistic despite having a solid financial foundation. Sarah Williams, a single mother who had been questioned extensively about her ability to manage a checking account. Miguel Rivera, a construction contractor whose accent had apparently led a loan officer to assume he was applying for far more credit than he could handle. Each story reinforced Marcus's growing conviction that the morning's incident was part of a much larger pattern. Financial institutions, whether intentionally or not, were creating barriers that prevented entire segments of the community from accessing services that could improve their economic situations. Walsh was clearly recognizing the broader implications of the story. "Mr. Chen, this seems to go well beyond one bad interaction. Are you suggesting that there's systemic discrimination in how banks serve different communities?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I'm suggesting that unconscious bias and assumptions can create real barriers to financial inclusion, whether it's intentional discrimination or just a failure to recognize how our assumptions affect others. The result is the same: people are excluded from services they need and deserve." Hawthorne, who had been listening to the various customer stories with growing concern, stepped forward. "Ms. Walsh, I want to be clear that Meridian National is committed to serving all members of our community fairly and respectfully. What we're hearing today is helping us understand where we've fallen short and how we can improve. What's your timeline for implementing changes?" Walsh asked. "We're going to begin immediately," Richardson replied. "Within the next week, we'll be conducting a comprehensive review of our customer service practices. Within 30 days, we'll implement new training protocols for all staff. And within 60 days, we'll host the community forum that Mr. Chen suggested." Marcus was impressed by their willingness to commit to specific timelines, but he also recognized the importance of accountability. "Miss Walsh, I think it would be valuable to have ongoing reporting on these efforts. Transparency will be key to ensuring that promises translate into real change. Walsh nodded approvingly. I'd be very interested in following up on this story as these initiatives develop. Would you all be willing to participate in periodic updates? The group agreed, and as the formal interview concluded, Marcus found himself surrounded by customers who wanted to continue the conversation. The energy in the lobby had shifted from frustration to hope, as the Sampre realized that their individual experiences were part of a larger pattern that could potentially be addressed. Rosa Mendoza approached Marcus again, this time with a determined expression. Mr. Chen, I've been thinking about what you said about community involvement. I know many people in our neighborhood who have had problems with banks. Maybe we could organize some kind of group to work on these issues. Marcus felt a spark of excitement at her suggestion. That's a brilliant idea, Mrs. Mendoza. A community advocacy group could not only work with banks on policy changes, but also help educate people about their rights and how to navigate financial services. James Thompson overheard their conversation and joined in. I'd be interested in participating too. As a business owner, I could help other entrepreneurs understand how to present themselves effectively when seeking loans or other services. The impromptu gathering was developing into something that resembled a grassroots organizing meeting. People were exchanging contact information, sharing ideas, and making plans to continue working together beyond this initial encounter. Walsh observed the developing organization with professional interest. This is remarkable, she commented to Marcus. What started as a news story about customer service is turning into a community movement. Marcus looked around at the diverse group of people who had come together around shared experiences of exclusion and a common desire for change. Sometimes the most powerful movements start with individual moments of recognition. When people realize they're not alone in their experiences, they find the courage to demand better. As the afternoon wore on, the initial crisis atmosphere in the bank had transformed into something that felt more like a community meeting. Richardson and Hawthorne had remained engaged throughout, listening to stories, taking notes, and participating in discussions about potential solutions. The incident that had begun with Jonathan Whitmore's dismissive treatment was evolving into a catalyst for broader social change. Marcus realized that his wealth had given him a platform that others lacked, but the real power came from the community that was forming around shared values of respect, inclusion, and equality. The day was far from over, but already Marcus could see that its impact would extend far beyond the walls of Meridian National Bank. The conversation that had started in one office was expanding to encompass an entire community's relationship with financial institutions, and the potential for change felt both real and urgent. 3 weeks after the incident at Meridian National Bank, Marcus found himself standing in the community center of East Sacramento, looking out at an audience of over 200 people. The room buzzed with energy as community members, bank representatives, local business owners, and city officials prepared for what had become known as the Financial Inclusion Forum. The transformation in those 3 weeks had been remarkable. What started as a single customer service complaint had evolved into a comprehensive community initiative addressing financial equity across Sacramento. Marcus had never intended to become a public figure, but he found himself uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between financial institutions and the communities they served. Dr. Angela Foster, a community development specialist from UC Davis, served as the forum's moderator. She had extensive experience in facilitating conversations about economic equity and had volunteered her services after reading about the initiative in the Sacramento Business Journal. Good evening, everyone, Dr. Foster began, her voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. We're here tonight because one person's experience of discrimination sparked a broader conversation about how our financial institutions serve our entire community. But this isn't just about one bank or one incident. It's about creating lasting change that benefits everyone. Marcus was scheduled to speak first, providing context for the evening's discussions. As he approached the podium, he felt the weight of responsibility that had been building over the past 3 weeks. The story had gained regional attention, and he knew that people were looking to him for leadership. He wasn't sure he was qualified to provide. 3 weeks ago, Marcus began, I walked into a bank expecting a routine business meeting. Instead, I encountered assumptions and biases that made me realize how many barriers exist in our financial system, barriers that affect far more people than just me. He paused, looking out at the diverse audience. He could see Rosa Mendoza in the front row, along with James Thompson, Sarah Williams, and dozens of other community members who had shared their own stories of exclusion and discrimination. But what happened next was even more important than the initial incident. This community came together, not just to complain about problems, but to work collaboratively on solutions. Tonight, we're going to hear about the progress that's been made and the work that still needs to be done. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of activity. Meridian National Bank had moved quickly to implement the changes they had promised. Patricia Richardson had personally overseen a comprehensive review of customer service policies, while Robert Hawthorne had brought in external consultants conduct bias training for all staff members. But the changes extended far beyond Meridian National. The publicity around the incident had prompted other banks in the region to examine their own practices. The California Banking Association had reached out to Marcus, requesting his input on industry-wide standards for customer service and financial inclusion. Richardson took the podium after Marcus, carrying a folder thick with documentation of the changes that had been implemented. When Mr. Chen called me 3 weeks ago, I was embarrassed and angry about what had happened in our bank. But I'm here tonight to report on the concrete steps we've taken to ensure it never happens again. She outlined the comprehensive training program that all Meridian National employees had completed, focusing on unconscious bias, cultural competency, and inclusive customer service. The bank had also revised its customer service protocols to ensure that every person entering the bank received the same level of respect and attention, regardless of their appearance or perceived financial status. We've also established a customer advocacy office, Richardson continued, staffed by community members who can help customers navigate our services and address any concerns about treatment or access. Rosa Mendoza has agreed to serve as our first community liaison. The announcement drew spontaneous applause from the audience. Mrs. Mendoza had emerged as a natural leader in the community organizing efforts, combining her educational background with her passion for ensuring that others didn't experience the discrimination she had faced. When Mrs. Mendoza took the podium, her voice carried the authority of someone who had taught for 3 decades and wasn't intimidated by public speaking. This position isn't just about handling complaints, she explained. It's about proactively reaching out to community members who might not feel comfortable accessing banking services, educating them about their options, and making sure the banks understand our community's needs. The forum continued with presentations from other financial institutions that had voluntarily participated in the review process. Sacramento Credit Union had implemented new outreach programs targeting underserved communities. Wells Fargo had revised their loan application processes to reduce barriers for small business owners. Bank of America had established partnerships with community organizations to provide financial literacy education. James Thompson spoke about the small business support network that had emerged from the initial organizing efforts. We realized that many entrepreneurs from minority communities were struggling not just with access to capital, but with understanding how to present their business plans effectively to lenders, he explained. The network had organized monthly workshops where experienced business owners mentored new entrepreneurs, helping them develop professional presentations, understand financial requirements, and navigate the often complex world of business banking. In just 3 weeks, they had already helped 5 new businesses secure financing that had previously been denied. Sarah Williams had taken on the challenge of addressing financial services for single parents and working families. Many of us face unique challenges in managing our finances, she told the audience. Irregular work schedules, childcare responsibilities, and limited transportation can make it difficult to access traditional banking services during regular business hours. Her advocacy had led to several banks extending their hours and offering mobile banking services in community locations. More importantly, it had sparked conversations about designing financial products that better serve the needs of working families. The evening's most powerful moment came when Jonathan Whitmore took the podium. The banker who had called Marcus financially stupid looked visibly nervous as he approached the microphone, but his voice was steady as he began to speak. 3 weeks ago, I made assumptions about a customer based on his appearance and age, Whitmore said. Those assumptions led me to treat him with disrespect and to miss an opportunity to serve a valued client. But more importantly, they revealed biases that I didn't even realize I held. He paused, clearly struggling with the vulnerability required to speak publicly about his mistakes. I want to apologize not just to Mr. Chen, but to anyone else who has been treated dismissively by me or any other banking professional. We have a responsibility to serve our entire community with respect and dignity. Whitmore went on to describe the personal journey he had undertaken since the incident, including diversity training, community service, and ongoing conversations with customers from different backgrounds. I can't undo what happened, he concluded, but I can commit to being part of the solution going forward. The audience's response was mixed. Some applause, but also visible skepticism from community members who had faced similar treatment. Marcus appreciated Whitmore's courage in speaking publicly, but he also understood that rebuilding trust would require consistent action over time, not just words. Dr. Foster used Whitmore's presentation as a transition to the evening's workshop sessions. The audience broke into smaller groups to discuss specific aspects of financial inclusion: small business lending, affordable housing finance, retirement planning for low-income workers, and financial education for young people. Marcus moved between the groups, listening to ideas and occasionally contributing insights from his business experience. He was struck by the creativity and practical wisdom that emerged from these community conversations. People who had been excluded from traditional financial services had developed innovative approaches to building wealth and managing money that could benefit everyone. In the small business group, a restaurant owner named Maria Gonzalez proposed a community investment fund that would allow local residents to invest in neighborhood businesses. Instead of sending our money to Wall Street, she argued, we could keep it in our community, supporting businesses we know and creating wealth for local families. The housing group, led by a contractor named David Park, was exploring cooperative ownership models that could make homeownership accessible to working families who couldn't qualify for traditional mortgages. There are proven models from other cities, Park explained, but they require collaboration between community organizations, local government, and financial institutions. The education group was developing a curriculum for high school students that would combine financial literacy with entrepreneurship training. We want to teach young people not just how to manage money, but how to create wealth and build businesses that serve their communities, explained teacher Jennifer Liu. As the evening progressed, Marcus realized that the forum had exceeded his expectations. Instead of a one-time event focused on complaints about past discrimination, it had become a launching pad for ongoing community-driven initiatives that could create lasting economic change. The energy in the room was palpable as groups reported back on their discussions. People were exchanging contact information, making commitments to continue working together, and identifying specific next steps for their various projects. Dr. Foster closed the forum by announcing the formation of the Sacramento Financial Inclusion Coalition, a permanent organization that would continue advocating for policy changes, monitoring progress at financial institutions, and supporting community-based economic development initiatives. Change doesn't happen overnight, she told the audience, but it does happen when communities come together around shared values and common goals. What we've seen tonight is proof that people from different backgrounds can work together to create solutions that benefit everyone. As people began to leave the community center, Marcus found himself surrounded by individuals who wanted to continue conversations, share additional ideas, or simply express gratitude for the platform that had been created. The energy reminded him of his early days building his business empire, that sense of possibility when vision begins to transform into reality. Rosa Mendoza approached him as he was preparing to leave. "Marcus," she said, using the informal address that had developed over their weeks of working together, "I wanted to thank you for not just fighting for yourself, but for all of us." Marcus shook his head. "Mrs. Mendoza, you and everyone else here did the real work. I just happened to be the catalyst." "Sometimes," she replied with a knowing smile. "That's the most important role of all." As Marcus drove home through the Sacramento night, He reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in 3 weeks. The incident at the bank had transformed from a personal embarrassment into a community movement that was already producing tangible results. But more than that, it had connected him to a network of people who shared his values and commitment to creating positive change. The wealth he had accumulated through his business success had given him a platform, but the real power came from the community that had formed around shared experiences and common goals. The forum demonstrated that when people come together with mutual respect and determination, they can create solutions that seem impossible when facing challenges alone. 6 months had passed since Marcus Chen walked into Meridian National Bank, expecting a routine business meeting. As he stood in his new office overlooking downtown Sacramento, he marveled at how dramatically his life's trajectory had shifted because of what Jonathan Whitmore had dismissively called financially stupid behavior. The office belonged to the Chen Foundation for Financial Equity, an organization that hadn't existed before that pivotal morning at the bank. What started as a personal affront had evolved into a comprehensive initiative addressing systemic barriers to financial inclusion across Northern California. Marcus had initially resisted the idea of starting a foundation. His preference had always been for direct business investments that generated both profit and social impact. But the overwhelming response to the Financial Inclusion Forum had convinced him that a more formal structure was needed to coordinate the various initiatives that had emerged from the community organizing efforts. The Foundation's mission was elegantly simple: to eliminate barriers that prevented people from accessing the financial services and investment opportunities they needed to build wealth and economic security. But the execution required sophisticated strategies that drew on Marcus's business acumen, the community's grassroots wisdom, and partnerships with institutions willing to embrace genuine change. Elena Chen had been skeptical when her son first described his plans for the foundation. "Mujo," she had said, using the Spanish endearment she had picked up during her years working alongside Latino colleagues at the diner. "You've worked so hard to build your business. Are you sure you want to get distracted by all this activism?" But as the months progressed, Elena had become one of the Foundation's most effective advocates. Her decades of experience serving working-class customers had given her insights into the daily financial challenges that middle-class reformers often overlooked. She now served as the Foundation's Community Engagement Director, a role that perfectly combined her natural empathy with her practical understanding of economic struggle. The Foundation's first major initiative was the Community Investment Accelerator, a program that provided both capital and mentorship to entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. Unlike traditional business incubators that focused primarily on technology startups, the accelerator supported a diverse range of businesses that served local communities: restaurants, construction companies, childcare centers, automotive repair shops, and retail stores. Maria Gonzalez, the restaurant owner who had proposed the Community Investment Fund during the forum, had become the accelerator's first success story. Her proposal to expand her family's taco truck operation into a full restaurant had been rejected by 3 different banks before she entered the accelerator program. "They kept telling me that restaurants were too risky," Maria explained during a presentation to potential investors. "But they never bothered to understand our business model, our customer base, or our track record of profitability with the food truck." The accelerator had provided Maria with more than just capital. Business mentors helped her refine her expansion plan, financial advisors guided her through the complex process of commercial real estate financing, and marketing specialists assisted with brand development and customer outreach strategies. 6 months later, Gonzalez Family Kitchen was not only thriving, but had become a community gathering place that hosted financial literacy workshops, small business networking events, and cultural celebrations. The restaurant had created 15 full-time jobs and was generating enough profit to allow Maria to begin planning a second location. The difference wasn't just the money, Maria reflected. It was having people who believed in our vision and understood that our success was connected to the community's success. The accelerator's portfolio now included 23 businesses representing a cross-section of the local economy. A childcare center, founded by Sarah Williams, was providing affordable services to working families, while creating employment opportunities for early childhood educators. James Thompson's construction company had grown from a one-person operation to a crew of 12 specializing in affordable housing development and green building techniques. David Park's cooperative housing initiative had evolved into the Sacramento Community Land Trust, an innovative model that separated land ownership from housing ownership to create permanently affordable homeownership opportunities. The trust had purchased its first property, a deteriorating apartment building that was converted into cooperatively owned condominiums sold to working families at cost. Traditional homeownership models assume that housing should be treated as a commodity for wealth accumulation. Park explained to a group of city officials considering policy changes to support the land trust model. But what if we treated housing primarily as a human need, with wealth building as a secondary benefit? The land trust model ensured that homes remained affordable in perpetuity, preventing the gentrification that often displaced longtime residents when neighborhoods improved. Homeowners built equity through their mortgage payments and property improvements, but couldn't profit from speculation or rising land values. Rosa Mendoza had emerged as one of the region's most effective advocates for financial inclusion. Her role as community liaison at Meridian National had expanded into a consulting practice that worked with financial institutions throughout California to improve their community engagement and customer service practices. The key insight, Rosa explained during a presentation to the California Banking Association, is that good customer service for marginalized communities benefits everyone. When you design systems that work for people facing the greatest barriers, you create systems that work better for all customers. Her consulting work had led to measurable improvements in customer satisfaction and community relations at over 30 financial institutions. More importantly, it had resulted in increased lending to minority-owned businesses, expanded access to affordable housing finance, and better financial education programs in underserved communities. The success stories were gratifying, but Marcus knew that individual achievements were only meaningful if they contributed to systemic change. The foundation had therefore invested heavily in policy advocacy and research initiatives designed to address structural barriers to financial inclusion. Dr. Angela Foster had joined the foundation as Director of Research and Policy, bringing her academic expertise to bear on questions of economic equity and community development. Her team was conducting comprehensive studies of lending practices, banking accessibility, and wealth-building opportunities across different demographic groups. Data is power, Dr. Foster explained during a presentation to state legislators, considering new regulations for financial institutions. When we can demonstrate exactly how current practices create disparities, we can design targeted interventions that address root causes rather than just symptoms. The research had already influenced policy discussions at both state and federal levels. A comprehensive study of small business lending practices had provided evidence that led to new regulations requiring banks to report demographic data about their commercial loan portfolios. Another study examining the impact of bank branch closures in low-income communities had informed federal legislation aimed at ensuring continued access to banking services. But perhaps the Foundation's most innovative initiative was the Financial Empowerment Curriculum, a comprehensive educational program designed for high school students from working-class backgrounds. Unlike traditional financial literacy programs that focused on budgeting and debt management, the curriculum emphasized wealth-building, entrepreneurship, and economic justice. Jennifer Liu, the high school teacher who had proposed the idea during the forum, had taken a sabbatical from her teaching position to develop and implement the curriculum. Most financial education treats students as future consumers rather than future creators of wealth, she explained. We want to teach young people that they can be business owners, investors, and economic leaders in their communities. The curriculum combined practical skills, understanding credit, managing investments, starting businesses, with critical analysis of economic systems and their impact on different communities. Students learned not only how to navigate existing financial institutions, but also how to advocate for changes that would benefit their families and neighborhoods. The program's first cohort of students had achieved remarkable results. 12 graduates had started their own businesses while still in high school, ranging from tutoring services to online retail operations. 8 had secured internships with local financial institutions, where they were helping to design youth-oriented banking products. 6 had been accepted to competitive business and economics programs at universities, with full scholarships funded by the foundation. These young people are going to be leaders in creating a more equitable economy, Jennifer observed. They understand both the challenges and the opportunities in ways that previous generations couldn't. The success of the Foundation's various initiatives had attracted national attention. Marcus found himself frequently invited to speak at conferences about impact investing, community development, and financial inclusion. Major financial institutions were seeking his advice on improving their community engagement practices. But the attention also brought scrutiny and criticism. Some accused Marcus of grandstanding, suggesting that his advocacy work was more about personal publicity than genuine social change. Others questioned whether his wealth gave him the moral authority to speak for working-class communities. Marcus took these criticisms seriously, particularly concerns about his role in communities where he wasn't born or raised. He had worked hard to ensure that the Foundation's leadership reflected the diversity of the communities it served, and that community members maintained control over initiatives that affected them directly. My wealth gives me access and platforms that others don't have, Marcus acknowledged during a panel discussion about philanthropy and social justice. But wealth doesn't give me wisdom about other people's experiences or needs. The Foundation works because community members are leading the initiatives that matter most to them. The panel discussion was taking place at UC Berkeley's Business School, where Marcus had been invited to deliver the annual lecture on social entrepreneurship. As he looked out at the audience of business students, professors, and community leaders, he reflected on how his own understanding of success had evolved over the past year. When I first started building wealth, he told the audience, I thought success meant accumulating enough money to insulate myself and my family from economic insecurity. That's still important. But I've learned that individual wealth, without community prosperity, is ultimately hollow. He paused, thinking about the phone call he had received that morning from Jonathan Whitmore. The banker who had once called him financially stupid was now working with the Foundation to develop new training programs for financial services professionals. Real success, Marcus continued, means creating systems where everyone has the opportunity to build economic security and contribute to their community's prosperity. It means using whatever advantages you have, whether that's wealth, education, connections, or just time to expand opportunities for others. The lecture concluded with a question-and-answer session that ran well over the scheduled time, as students peppered Marcus with questions about impact investing, community organizing, and balancing profit with social purpose. Many were clearly inspired by the possibility of using business skills to address social problems. After the event, Marcus drove back to Sacramento feeling both energized and contemplative. The Foundation's work was thriving, but he knew that the real test would be whether the changes they had catalyzed could sustain themselves over time. The answer came in an unexpected form. 2 weeks later, when he received a call from a high school student in Oakland named Jamal Washington. Jamal had heard about the Foundation's work through the financial empowerment curriculum and wanted to adapt the model for his own community. Mr. Chen, Jamal said during their phone conversation, I've been researching what you all did in Sacramento, and I think we could do something similar here. But I want to make sure we're learning from your experiences while addressing the specific challenges in our neighborhoods. The conversation lasted over an hour, as Jamal outlined his preliminary research into banking practices in Oakland, the community leaders he had already contacted, and his ideas for organizing a local forum similar to the one that had launched the Sacramento initiative. I don't need you to come here and lead this, Jamal clarified toward the end of their conversation, but I would appreciate any advice you can offer, and maybe some connections to people who could help us get started. As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that this was exactly what success looked like. The model they had developed in Sacramento was inspiring young people to organize their own communities, adapt the strategies to local conditions, and take ownership of creating change. The Foundation would continue its work in Northern California, but its most important impact might be in demonstrating that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they combined personal courage with community collaboration. That evening, Marcus met his mother for dinner at Gonzalez family kitchen, a weekly tradition they had maintained despite their increasingly busy schedules. As they shared Maria's famous carnitas tacos, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Sometimes I think about that morning at the bank," she said, "and I wonder what would have happened if you had just walked away instead of making that phone call." Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think someone else would have eventually challenged those assumptions and started this conversation." The conditions were already there: the discrimination, the community frustration, the willingness to work for change. "I just happened to be the spark." "Maybe," Elena replied, "but I'm proud that my son was willing to be that spark." As they finished their meal, Marcus looked around the restaurant at the diverse crowd of families, business people, students, and community activists who had made it their regular gathering place. The conversations he could overhear ranged from homework help to business planning to neighborhood organizing. This was what economic justice looked like in practice. Not a utopian transformation of the entire system, but a steady expansion of opportunities for people to build wealth, create businesses, own homes, and contribute to their community's prosperity. The incident at Meridian National Bank had taught Marcus that his individual success was meaningful only when connected to broader community well-being. But it had also demonstrated that one person's courage to challenge unfair treatment could ripple outward in ways that created lasting change. 6 months after Jonathan Whitmore called him financially stupid, Marcus Chen had helped create a movement that was reshaping how financial institutions served their communities. More importantly, he had learned that true wealth came not from accumulating money for its own sake, but from using resources and opportunities to expand possibilities for others. The story that began with discrimination had evolved into a legacy of empowerment, proving that the most profound transformations often start with a single person's refusal to accept that unfair treatment is simply the way things are. 1 year after the initial incident, Marcus received an invitation that would test everything he had learned about leadership and community building. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco was hosting a national symposium on financial inclusion, and they wanted him to deliver the keynote address to an audience of central bankers, regulators, and policymakers from across the country. The invitation represented both recognition and responsibility. Marcus understood that his words would influence decisions affecting millions of people's access to financial services, but he also knew that his credibility came not from his wealth or business success, but from the community relationships he had built over the past year. He spent weeks preparing for the speech, consulting with Rosa Mendoza, Dr. Foster, Elena, and other foundation partners about the key messages that needed to be conveyed. The challenge was translating grassroots organizing experiences into language that would resonate with federal regulators without losing the authentic voice of community advocacy. The Federal Reserve Building in San Francisco was imposing, its classical architecture designed to convey stability and authority. As Marcus walked through the marble corridors toward the auditorium, he thought about the contrast between this environment and the community center where the Financial Inclusion Forum had taken place. The audience consisted primarily of older white men in expensive suits, exactly the demographic that traditionally controlled monetary policy and banking regulation. Marcus had learned not to make assumptions based on appearance, but he also understood that changing entrenched systems required reaching people who might be resistant to new ideas. "Distinguished colleagues," Marcus began, standing at a podium bearing the Federal Reserve seal. "1 year ago, I experienced what millions of Americans face regularly when seeking financial services. The assumption that my appearance determined my worthiness for respect and serious consideration." He recounted the incident at Meridian National Bank, but focused primarily on what had happened afterward: the community organizing, the policy changes, the business creation, and the development of new models for community-controlled economic development. "The traditional approach to financial inclusion," Marcus continued, "treats access to banking services as a favor that institutions grant to deserving community members. But true inclusion requires recognizing that communities themselves are the experts on their economic needs and the most effective drivers of sustainable solutions. The speech outlines specific policy recommendations based on the Foundation's research and community organizing experiences. Marcus proposed new regulations requiring banks to maintain physical branches in the communities where they collected deposits. He advocated for community investment requirements that went beyond the current Community Reinvestment Act to include meaningful community participation in defining investment priorities. Most controversially, he proposed public banking options that would operate as community-controlled financial institutions, competing with private banks while providing services specifically designed for working-class customers. Public banking isn't about replacing private financial institutions, Marcus explained, but about ensuring that every community has access to financial services designed to build wealth rather than extract it. The audience's response was politely attentive but not enthusiastic. During the question and answer session, several speakers challenged Marcus's proposals as unrealistic or potentially destabilizing to existing financial systems. Mr. Chen asked a Federal Reserve economist, "Your proposals would require significant regulatory changes and substantial public investment. How do you respond to concerns that such interventions could reduce efficiency in financial markets?" Marcus had anticipated this question and had prepared his response carefully. The current system is efficient at concentrating wealth and extracting profits from working-class communities. If that's the efficiency we're trying to preserve, then yes, my proposals would reduce it. But if we measure efficiency by how well financial systems serve community prosperity and economic mobility, then our current approach is extraordinarily inefficient. The exchange continued for nearly an hour, with Marcus fielding questions about implementation costs, regulatory complexity, and potential unintended consequences. He drew on specific examples from the Foundation's work to demonstrate that community-controlled financial institutions could operate successfully while serving populations that traditional banks often neglected. After the symposium concluded, Marcus was approached by several attendees who expressed private interest in exploring his proposals further. Among them was Dr. Rashida Patel, an economist from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors who had been studying financial inclusion issues for over a decade. "Your presentation was refreshing," Dr. Patel told him over coffee following the event. "Too often these discussions focus on tweaking existing systems rather than questioning their fundamental assumptions. I'd like to explore how we might pilot some of your community banking proposals." The conversation with Dr. Patel led to an unexpected opportunity. The Federal Reserve was planning a 2-year study of alternative banking models, and they invited the Chen Foundation to participate as both a research partner and a pilot site for experimental community banking initiatives. The partnership would provide federal backing for establishing Sacramento's first community-controlled public bank, an institution that would operate according to principles developed through the Foundation's community organizing work. Unlike traditional banks that prioritized shareholder profits, the public bank would be governed by community representatives and chartered specifically to support local economic development. Elena Chen was initially skeptical about the federal partnership. "Mijo," she warned during one of their dinner conversations, "when the government gets involved, things get complicated. Are you sure this won't compromise the community control that makes our work effective?" Her concerns were shared by other Foundation partners, particularly those who had experienced discrimination from government agencies in addition to private financial institutions. The decision to pursue the federal partnership required extensive community discussion and careful negotiation to ensure that community governance remained central to the initiative. Rosa Mendoza emerged as a key voice in these discussions, drawing on her experience as community liaison at Meridian National to identify potential conflicts between federal requirements and community priorities. The question, Rosa argued during a Foundation board meeting, isn't whether we can trust the federal government, but whether we can structure this partnership in ways that strengthen community power rather than undermining it. The negotiations took months, but eventually resulted in an innovative governance structure that satisfied both federal regulators and community advocates. The Sacramento Community Bank would operate under federal charter but with a community-controlled board elected by local residents and small business owners. The bank's lending priorities would be determined through annual community assemblies where residents could propose and vote on economic development initiatives. Profits would be reinvested in community development rather than distributed to external shareholders. The establishment of the community bank represented a significant expansion of the foundation's work, but it also created new challenges. Marcus found himself navigating complex federal regulations while maintaining accountability to community partners who had different priorities and perspectives. The learning curve was steep, but Marcus was supported by an increasingly sophisticated team of community organizers, policy advocates, and financial professionals who shared his commitment to community-controlled economic development. Dr. Angela Foster had recruited several graduate students to conduct ongoing research on the bank's impact, creating a feedback loop that allowed for continuous improvement in services and governance practices. Jennifer Liu had developed training programs for community board members, ensuring that local residents had the knowledge and skills needed to provide effective oversight of banking operations. The community bank's first year of operation exceeded all expectations. Local deposits grew from an initial $2.5 million to over $18 million. As residents transferred their accounts from institutions that had previously treated them dismissively, small business lending increased by 340% compared to traditional banks serving the same neighborhoods. More importantly, the bank's community assemblies had become forums for broader economic planning and development. Residents were using these gatherings to coordinate cooperative businesses, plan affordable housing developments, and design neighborhood improvement projects that enhanced both property values and community cohesion. The success in Sacramento attracted attention from communities across the country. Marcus received inquiries from organizers in Detroit, Phoenix, Portland, and dozens of smaller cities, interested in replicating the community banking model. But he had learned from his conversation with Jamal Washington that sustainable change required local leadership rather than external experts imposing solutions. Instead of expanding the foundation's operations to other cities, Marcus focused on developing resources and training programs that supported locally led organizing efforts. The foundation created the Community Banking Institute, a 6-month training program that brought organizers from around the country to Sacramento to study the community bank model and develop implementation strategies appropriate for their local contexts. The first cohort included activists from 15 different states, representing urban neighborhoods, rural farming communities, and Native American reservations. Each brought unique perspectives and challenges that enriched everyone's understanding of community-controlled economic development. Jamal Washington was among the participants in that first cohort. Now a sophomore at UC Berkeley studying economics and ethnic studies, he had continued his organizing work in Oakland while developing academic expertise in community development finance. The Sacramento model gives us a framework, Jamal explained during one of the Institute's workshops. But Oakland's history and demographics require different strategies. We need to address gentrification pressures and displacement in ways that might not be as relevant in other communities. His insight reflected a sophistication that impressed Marcus and reinforced his belief that young organizers would ultimately lead the next generation of economic justice work. The foundation's role was to provide resources and support rather than direction or control. As the second anniversary of the original bank incident approached, Marcus found himself reflecting on the unexpected trajectory his life had taken. The wealth accumulation that had once been his primary focus now seemed like preparation for work he hadn't known he would be called to do. The Chin Foundation had evolved into a nationally recognized leader in community-controlled economic development. But its success was measured not in the size of its endowment or the prestige of its board members, but in the number of communities that had gained greater control over their economic futures. Financial institutions across California had adopted customer service protocols developed through the Foundation's community organizing work. State legislation, inspired by the Foundation's policy advocacy, had expanded access to affordable housing finance and small business development capital. Most significantly, the community banking model was spreading organically as trained organizers returned to their home communities with knowledge, networks, and resources needed to establish locally controlled financial institutions. The ripple effects extended far beyond banking and finance. The community assemblies that governed the Sacramento Community Bank had inspired neighborhood councils that addressed issues ranging from education and public safety to environmental justice and cultural programming. Marcus often thought about Jonathan Whitmore during these moments of reflection. The banker who had called him financially stupid had become an unexpected ally in the foundation's work, serving as a trainer in the bias recognition workshops that were now required for all California banking employees. Their relationship had evolved from antagonistic to collaborative, demonstrating that individual transformation was possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. Whitmore's participation in the foundation's work carried particular weight because of his previous behavior, showing other financial professionals that meaningful change was both necessary and achievable. The transformation went beyond individual attitudes to encompass institutional practices and regulatory frameworks. The Federal Reserve's support for community banking experiments had led to policy changes that made it easier for communities to establish locally controlled financial institutions. As Marcus drove home through the Sacramento night, he thought about Jamal Washington in Oakland and the dozens of other young people who were now organizing their own communities for economic justice. The work would continue long after he was gone, carried forward by people who understood that building wealth and building community were not separate goals, but two aspects of the same essential task. The real measure of success, Marcus had learned, was not in the zeros on a bank statement, but in the number of people who gained the tools and opportunities to write their own stories of economic empowerment. That was a legacy worth building. One conversation, one partnership, and one transformed community at a time. The incident that began with one person's prejudiced assumptions had become a movement that was reshaping how entire communities approached economic development and financial empowerment. It proved that lasting change required both individual courage and collective action, both immediate responses to injustice and sustained commitment to systemic transformation. 3 years after the original confrontation, Marcus stood before the United Nations Economic and Social Council in New York, addressing delegates from 1930 countries about community-controlled banking as a tool for sustainable development. The invitation had come through Dr. Patel, who now served as a senior advisor to the UN on financial inclusion initiatives. The journey from a discriminatory encounter in Sacramento to addressing global leaders seemed surreal, but Marcus understood that local organizing work had international implications. Economic inequality was a global challenge that required innovative solutions, and the community banking model had demonstrated scalability across different cultural and economic contexts. Honorable delegates. Marcus began, looking out at representatives from countries spanning 6 continents. The story I want to share with you today began with a moment of prejudice in a bank lobby, but it became a blueprint for economic democracy that is now being implemented in communities from rural Kenya to urban Brazil. The UN presentation focused on how community-controlled financial institutions could support the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly those related to poverty reduction, economic growth, and reducing inequality. Marcus shared data from the growing network of community banks that had emerged from the Sacramento model, demonstrating measurable improvements in local economic indicators. In Detroit, the Motor City Community Bank had financed the development of urban agriculture cooperatives that provided fresh food to neighborhoods that had been abandoned by major grocery chains. The bank's community assemblies had identified food security as a priority, leading to investments in greenhouse facilities, farmers markets, and food processing enterprises. In rural Montana, the High Plains Community Bank had supported the development of renewable energy cooperatives that allowed farmers to generate income from wind and solar installations while maintaining their agricultural operations. The community-controlled governance structure ensured that energy development served local economic development rather than external corporate profits. On the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, the Lakota Community Bank had pioneered culturally specific financial services that respected traditional indigenous values while providing modern banking capabilities. The bank's lending practices incorporated traditional concepts of reciprocity and collective responsibility, creating a model that other tribal communities were now adapting. The international examples were even more striking. In Medellin, Colombia, community banks in neighborhoods previously controlled by drug cartels had become anchors for legitimate economic development, providing alternatives to illegal economic activities while building community solidarity. In Lagos, Nigeria, women's cooperative banks had emerged from the Sacramento training model, providing financial services to market vendors and small-scale entrepreneurs who had been excluded from formal banking systems. These institutions were demonstrating that community control could be effectively combined with mobile banking technology to serve populations that traditional banks found unprofitable. The UN presentation generated significant interest, particularly from representatives of countries struggling with financial exclusion and economic inequality. Several delegates approached Marcus afterward to discuss technical assistance for implementing community banking initiatives in their own countries. Dr. Amara Diallo, representing Senegal's Ministry of Economic Development, was particularly interested in adapting the model for rural communities where traditional banking infrastructure was limited. In our villages, she explained, people have always practiced collective economics through rotating credit associations and mutual aid societies. Your community banking model could formalize these practices while connecting them to broader financial systems. The conversation with Dr. Diallo led to the Foundation's first international partnership, a collaboration with Senegalese organizers to establish community banks in 3 rural villages. The initiative would test whether the Sacramento model could be successfully adapted to different cultural and economic contexts. But the international work also created tension within the Foundation's board. Some community members worried that global expansion would divert resources and attention from local needs in Sacramento. Others questioned whether Marcus had the cultural competence to advise communities in countries where he had never lived. The concerns came to a head during a particularly intense board meeting, 6 months after the UN presentation. Teresa Morales, a board member who had been with the Foundation since its earliest days, voiced the skepticism that several others shared. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades organizing in Sacramento's Latino community, "we started this work because banks in our own neighborhoods were treating our people badly. Now you're flying around the world giving speeches at the UN. How do we know you haven't lost touch with the communities that made this foundation possible?" The question stung because it touched on Marcus's deepest fears about his evolving role. Success had brought opportunities and platforms that he had never sought, but it had also created distance from the grassroots organizing work that had originally motivated him. Elena Chen, now in her 70s but still sharp and engaged, spoke up from her seat at the board table. "Teresa raises important questions that we all need to consider. But I want to remind everyone that Marcus didn't seek out these speaking opportunities for personal glory. He accepted them because people around the world are facing the same problems we faced here in Sacramento." The board discussion continued for over 3 hours with passionate arguments on multiple sides. Some members advocated for focusing exclusively on local work, while others argued that the Foundation had a responsibility to share successful models with communities facing similar challenges. Rosa Mendoza, now serving as the board's chair, ultimately helped broker a compromise that addressed the core concerns while allowing for continued international engagement. The Foundation would establish clear guidelines for international work, ensuring that it never comprised more than 20% of the organization's resources or staff time. More importantly, the Foundation would require meaningful partnership with local organizers in any international initiatives, ensuring that communities maintained control over their own economic development rather than importing external solutions. The Senegal Partnership became a test case for these new guidelines. Instead of sending Sacramento organizers to West Africa, the Foundation brought Senegalese community leaders to California for extended training, then provided ongoing consultation and technical support as they developed banking models appropriate for their local contexts. Fatou Sarr, a women's cooperative leader from the village of Thies, spent 3 months in Sacramento studying the community bank's operations and governance structures, but she also taught Foundation staff about indigenous African banking practices that had sustained communities for centuries before colonial disruption. "Your community assemblies remind me of traditional village councils," Fatu observed during one of her presentations to Sacramento residents. But we also have practices around consensus building and collective decision-making that could strengthen your democratic processes. The cross-cultural exchange enriched both organizations, demonstrating that genuine partnership could produce innovations that neither community could have developed independently. The Thighs Community Bank that emerged from this collaboration incorporated elements of both Sacramento's democratic governance and traditional Wolof economic practices. The success of the Senegal partnership led to additional international collaborations, but each one was structured to ensure reciprocal learning rather than one-directional technical assistance. Foundation staff began incorporating lessons from partners in Colombia, Nigeria, and India into their work in Sacramento, creating a truly global network of community-controlled financial institutions. Meanwhile, the domestic impact of the Foundation's work continued to expand. The Community Banking Institute had trained organizers from over 200 communities across the United States, leading to the establishment of 47 community banks and credit unions operating according to democratic governance principles. The policy influence had also grown significantly. The Federal Reserve had adopted new regulations encouraging community-controlled banking, while several states had passed legislation making it easier for communities to establish public banks. California's passage of the Community Banking Act was particularly significant, as it provided a legal framework for municipal and county governments to establish public banks that would compete with private institutions while serving community development goals. Los Angeles became the first major city to establish a public bank under the new legislation, with the Bank of Los Angeles operating according to governance principles developed through the Sacramento model. The bank's community assemblies were held in multiple languages, reflecting the city's diversity while ensuring meaningful participation from immigrant communities that had been historically excluded from financial decision-making. The ripple effects extended into unexpected areas. The democratic governance practices developed for community banking had inspired similar approaches in other institutions. Several school districts were experimenting with participatory budgeting processes that allowed students and families to help determine spending priorities. Community health centers were adopting assembly-style governance that gave patients and community members real power over program development and service delivery. Even some private businesses were experimenting with worker and community ownership models that distributed both profits and decision-making power more equitably. Marcus often reflected on how far the work had traveled from its origins in a discriminatory encounter with a bank employee. What had started as a personal affront had catalyzed changes in international development policy, federal banking regulation, and community organizing practices across multiple sectors. But the most meaningful impact remained local and personal. The Foundation's offices were located in a building that had once housed a check-cashing business that charged exorbitant fees to working-class customers who couldn't access traditional banking services. Now the same space hosted financial literacy workshops, small business development seminars, and community assemblies where residents made decisions about millions of dollars in community investment resources. The transformation of that single building symbolized the broader changes that had occurred throughout Sacramento's working-class neighborhoods. Property values had increased as community-controlled investments improved neighborhood infrastructure and services. But the community land trust model had prevented the displacement that typically accompanied gentrification. Long-term residents were able to benefit from neighborhood improvements rather than being forced out by them. Local unemployment had dropped by 30%, as community banks prioritized lending to businesses that provided living wage jobs to neighborhood residents. High school graduation rates had improved as students participated in the financial empowerment curriculum and saw concrete pathways to economic success that didn't require leaving their communities. Most importantly, residents had gained confidence in their ability to shape economic conditions, rather than simply adapting to forces beyond their control. The community assemblies had created spaces where people who had been excluded from financial decision-making could develop skills in analysis, negotiation, and collective problem-solving. As Marcus prepared for the Foundation's 5th anniversary celebration, he knew that the real measure of success was not in the awards, speaking invitations, or media coverage he had received, but in the transformed lives and communities that had emerged from collective organizing work. The celebration was held in the same community center where the original Financial Inclusion Forum had taken place 5 years earlier. But this time, the event was planned and hosted entirely by community members, with the foundation staff serving in support roles rather than leadership positions. Rosa Mendoza served as the master of ceremonies, introducing speakers who represented the full breadth of the movement that had emerged from that initial bank confrontation. Jamal Washington, now a graduate student at UC Berkeley and the founder of Oakland's Community Economics Coalition, spoke about the next generation of organizing work. Jonathan Whitmore, whose assumptions had started the entire chain of events, addressed the audience about the ongoing work of confronting bias and building inclusive institutions. His presence was a powerful reminder that individual transformation was possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. But the evening's most moving moment came when Elena Chen took the stage to reflect on the journey that had brought them all together. Her voice was strong despite her advancing age, carrying the wisdom of someone who had witnessed both profound hardship and remarkable transformation. 5 years ago, Elena began. My son was insulted by a banker who judged him by his appearance. Tonight, we celebrate a movement that has changed how communities around the world think about economic power and democratic participation. She paused, looking out at the diverse audience of community organizers, policymakers, business owners, students, and families who had been touched by the Foundation's work. But the real celebration isn't about what we've accomplished. It's about what we've learned, that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they work together with respect, determination, and love for their communities. As the evening concluded with music, food, and continued conversations about future organizing work, Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the interactions and connections that filled the room with energy and possibility. The young man who had walked into Meridian National Bank 5 years earlier, seeking basic business services, had become someone he never expected to be: a catalyst for social change, a bridge between different communities, and a steward of resources that belonged ultimately to the collective movement for economic justice. The transformation had been as unexpected as it was profound, proving that the most meaningful changes in both individual lives and social systems often emerge from moments of conflict and challenge that force people to choose between accepting injustice and working to create something better. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.